Hello, I'm host Eric. I was talking to people. We're going to talk about how the INTP personality type uses extroverted intuition and how that differs from how the ENTP personality type uses that. Because the question was asked by an ENTP to an INTP, namely Zachary, who shall provide some insight to start us off here. Initial thoughts?
I just want to say I'm going to do my best to describe it because I'm still not completely conscious of how I use it. I think that me describing how I think I use it might find some. Or I guess okay, we can juxtapose that with Eric's view, and then in that juxtaposition, we will be able to see which elements aren't mutual, and
Can I
perhaps that would
explain
be.
how I use it?
Well,
Yeah,
hold
yeah.
on.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going
So,
to go.
okay, the way I use it is that when I speak, I always know in the back of my head that I'm like 4 steps ahead of myself. So when I'm organizing my thoughts, my NI tries to synthesize in the background all these like dispersed ideas so that I can format them correctly. So I have to like focus on these abstractions in my subconscious to do that.
I don't think that explains very well how you use NE, though.
No,
Are
that's
you
my
an
NE.
INTP?
My NI is the abstraction, but my NE is me always being a step ahead of myself because I'm always thinking out those strategies like in the different branches.
What I would say regarding how I use it, and you might be able to resonate with this, Bo. Um, my thoughts are sort of my thoughts and ideas in the abstract, and I think the NI, what you're talking about, might be the source of this as well. Is that a lot of my thoughts? I don't think in words. Like, I mean, sometimes I do, of course, but
Yeah,
I
I
feel like
always
my
have
thoughts are sort of like files almost, and the way
yeah
my mind's organized is like
I
different
have like a
folders.
faith in my ability to explain things, so I don't need to have this conscious dialogue within myself. I have this like
My NE is how it explains it. When I'm talking, like I don't have a concrete idea of what I want to say before I start speaking, and it's sort of it comes to me as I'm speaking. My NE does that. It and how it manifests in me, it sort of links everything together, links all the ideas together, so I don't really have to do it. It's sort of it's almost unconscious in that
yeah.
regard. So it's very weird.
I
I'm not
totally
really
know
sure.
what you mean.
What about you, Eric?
Well, I think about this a lot because it's much more difficult to define meaningfully and relate to others meaningfully experiences about a perceiving function than about a judging function, I think. Perceiving functions are harder to meaningfully express in abstractions because the perceiving thing is a frame of reference whereby when you say stuff, I'm just sort of floating around as the first thing. I'm floating first. I think that's the difference between maybe an INTP and an ENTP. At first, I'm floating, and I'm just sort of letting it sink in what I'm hearing, without caring at all about really casting judgment on what I'm hearing, but instead caring about what I can do with it, and then as a second step, as part of that, figuring what I can do with it, checking to see where it relates to other TI shit, right? But my first gut is what can I do with this thing? And I think that's the thing, is that my first gut is not to say, oh, here's an idea coming in. It's wrong because instead it's what can I do with this thing? And if one of the things I like to do with wrong stuff is point out its wrongness for various reasons, right? But that's not actually my first instinct. It's just what to do with it. There's only so much you can do with wrong shit, so you do whatever you do with it.
So INTPs are more like they identify the mechanism and then they decide if it fits in their own framework.
I would suspect INTPs are more like, oh, you're saying this thing. Let me check to see whether it's wrong or right. Okay, it's right. Now what can I do with it? And
I think
ENTPs
that
are like, what can I do with this thing? Well, let's see if it's right or wrong. That'll help me decide what to do with it.
You think that ENTPs sometimes apply their NE before they determine whether or not it's right or wrong? Do you think they apply that? They try to use it before they decide if it's right or wrong?
I don't think we use it. I think that's what I'm
I
saying.
filter a lot.
That is just a straight up default reflexive response to something. Is to when we're talking about something, I'm making associative links, exploring possible avenues of ways to grow from this thing that you're saying. Right? That's my default position. Some of those, but not all, will require or will be informed by whether or not I think your thing is right or wrong, and that's when I start getting into the TI shit, right? But prior to that, I may conclude without ever getting into the TI shit, because I may conclude, ooh, I could do this with that thing. I can make a joke instead. Then I'm not going to challenge you on the logic of it, because I was like, oh, I'd rather make this joke. I'm going to go with that angle this time. I don't care about argument. I only care about making people laugh right now or something, you know?
Yeah, what I do is I filter a lot based on my truth understanding of it. So if I don't think it's valuable to me, I just completely ignore it and just try and move to something else.
Now, with what earlier I described, I think the NE is still, that's evident NE, even though that's an action, like speaking, because it's, like you said, associative links in what I'm saying. I'm making those associative links as I'm speaking, and it sort of runs on its own process. But regarding to how I seek information, or how I perceive information, that would be my perceiving function. How I perceive information generally, and this is why I find it's very useful to read philosophers, even the ones I disagree with, because in them, I do agree that a lot of philosophy is basic ideas when you boil it down to. And you can look at Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, or you can look at Wikipedia to get an idea of what the general ideas are. But if you read the philosophers, it's a lot of polemics against opposite views, or they juxtapose their view against other possibilities. So it's polemics against stuff that doesn't work, and it's also arguments as to why they ought to prefer their framework or what they're presenting, right? When I'm reading that stuff, I find arguments they make that I can use the analogous mechanism in it to, or for something that's totally unrelated. And it's like a weird associative link. Like, I think that's a good way to put it, because I realize that there's a certain mechanism there that I can utilize that is relevant to me on a different level. One of the things an example of this is when I was reading Jung's description of the INTP, and he talks about how introverted thinkers, the people who are dominant introverted thinkers, a logic will always exist. It will always start at the subject and end with the subject. Like, you prevent objects from assuming their own authority in their own, how they relate as knowledge. You always refer back to your own subjective interpretation of it. And that's something that INTPs always do, even though they put emphasis on external facts when making decisions. And when I read that, although I do agree that is something that INTPs will do once they better understand themselves, that made me start thinking about, in general, phenomenology and how the sort of subject-object relationship works on a scale beyond just MBTI stuff, right? So that would be an example of when I read something in a book that was it was related in the sense that it is metaphysics still, but it gave me a different understanding of something else that was completely unrelated. And that's why I feel that, or that's how I think my NE works, is when I'm reading or I'm gathering new knowledge about something, I find there are certain processes that can be replicated on sort of a macro scale. So there might be a certain process at a microcosm level of a given property, or the given properties of a certain object in this instance. And I find that it can be replicated on a macrocosm scale. And that's how I think my NE works.
I mean, I think what you're doing there is exactly right, is the natural NETI thing, which is you're taking individual things that don't have much utility and organizing them into mechanisms and rules and principles and stuff, so that they can become useful. You're finding places where the generalizations don't break down, and you can draw conclusions about them. Finding places where they do break down, and you avoid building there. You know, you say this ground is swamp. I will not build upon it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Other thoughts on INTP usage of NE? it's curious to me because I was thinking earlier about the need for a NE dominant or an NI dominant to get the hang of the other side of the intuition. Because for the NE dominant, I'm looking constantly to what can I build on this. It's like, you can imagine it being this. Let's say there's a building that I'm walking along, right? I'm always just seeing like, oh, here's the roof of the building. I'll just build on top of this. I don't care I don't even look over the side of the building and see what's down there. I just see a flat place to build shit on, right? And so what I've had to learn in life in general is yes, you've noticed that is some place that's flattish and you can kind of build on it. You need to actually pay attention to why did you choose that one? Is it better than the other one or not better than the other one? There's another building over there you could have chosen to build on that roof. Why are you building on this one, Eric? And that's how I got to be familiar a little bit more with the notions of NI before I even called it that, was the idea that, okay, well, I do have to worry about whether the thing I'm building on is sound. On whatever kind of building it is. So let's say I'm adding a song to a Broadway play that somebody asked me to add a song to. If I just determine that the whole Broadway play is filled with just complete fucking garbage, it's like the worst imaginable thing. It's like Menopause the musical. Well, then there's no way I can. There's no good way to. That might be a bad example, but let's pretend there was no good way I can make a song for it or something. Then I just sort of have to understand it in that sense, you know.
Yeah, I think that if you notice a lot of, and you do this a lot, I think I do a lot too, the analogous relations thing, being able to pick up, we explain our concepts a lot through analogies, and it's very interesting to me because, and you mentioned it in our video a while back, there are certain mechanisms of existence that allow you to give an instant intuition of how something operates. And you can use that mechanism to apply to things that are even unrelated to the actual subject at hand. And it's fascinating to me, and I think that there's a certain TINE preference for analogous relations, not only in its utility in describing concepts, but how you can be used to further an understanding of something that you already have.
I agree, and it can best of all be used to pack ideas away so that they don't take up as much space or attention anymore. You've got them framed out and sort of named and put away. I think that's a good thing when that occurs.
Mm-hmm. Is that all we got to say about NE? I think that was pretty good. I think it was a pretty in-depth analysis of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the last thing to say is, of course, don't forget to eat plenty of cheese, except, actually, Unify, you're an INTP, and I always forget about you. You're so quiet. You have anything to say about this?
No, I'm just let Zach carry it. I got fairly developed FP, but I'm not good as Zach is with any.
You keep it in reserve. You don't bring it out to fight all the battles for you. Is that what you're saying?
And Eric has made me use NE, so that's why it's got kind of...
Yeah, Zach is really sharp. I'm surprised.
Yeah.
You look like an idiot, Zach. It's shocking. You're actually pretty smart. Is that what you're saying, Bo?
No, not at all.
Okay. Talk to you, everybody's viewers, later. Thank you for watching this episode.